This is Brenna O'Brien with Moms Demand Action, coming at you from Chicago. You are listening to Two Broads Talking Politics.
Are you listening?
Hi, everyone. This is Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics, and today I'm delighted to be talking to Jennifer Longdon, who is the newly elected representative in the state of Arizona in Legislative District 24. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, how are you today, Kelly? Thanks for inviting me to join you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. So we did a ton of interviews with candidates before the election, but it's fun to now be talking to people who have, in fact, won their election. So congratulations.
Thank you.
And when does the new term start?
So we're sworn in on January the 14th. In Arizona, constitutionally, it's the second Monday of January. So we'll be official then, but we're already working.
Sure, yeah. So maybe we could start, if you could just give our listeners a little bit of background about yourself and why you decided to run for the state house.
So as you mentioned, I live in Legislative District 24 here in Arizona, and that is Central Phoenix and South Scottsdale. And each district has between 200 and 225,000 people. So roughly 250,000 people in each of our districts. And so mine is largely urban. And it's also one of the most diverse districts in the state in terms of demographics and socioeconomic differences. So I decided to run. I was just a mom. I did PTA, I worked, and then 14 years ago, I was paralyzed in a random shooting. My fiance at the time and I were both shot at the same time. He was shot in the head and I was shot in the back. And while we survived our injuries, our lives were very drastically impacted. And I learned very quickly that policy had a very heavy effect on our lives. And I got involved first with helping to pass the Affordable Care Act as a citizen, working to educate other citizens here in Arizona. And then I just kept going. I worked on gun policy around the nation. I worked on various issues regarding gun violence or disability rights, or then more broadly, civil rights, human rights overall in my community. And as I got deeper and more involved, I came to a place that I really wanted to have an immediate impact on policy. And it was following the first Women's March. I spoke at the first Women's March. And at that time, I said, out here in this crowd are amazing women who are going to be great legislators. There's a governor, there's perhaps a future president right out here. But I didn't think it would be me at the time. Mm-hmm. And then our legislature went into session and immediately tried to get a nonpartisan or a bipartisan gun bill that makes it a felony to fire a gun in the air in an urban area. And then also went to work immediately to take away some of the rights of people with disabilities by creating an ADA notification law. And I realized that it wasn't enough to be behind the scenes, that I needed to get in the driver's seat. And that's when I decided to run. Long story.
It's a powerful story, though. So this year in Arizona, Democrats picked up 4 seats in this past election, but they're still in the minority by a tiny little bit, right? I believe it's 31 Republicans, right. 29 Democrats now.
Yeah.
And, of course, the state Senate in Arizona is also controlled by Republicans, and there's a Republican governor. So what are the sorts of ways that you're looking to sort of work together for bipartisan ideas? What do you see as sort of the kinds of bills that both the Republicans and the Democrats in Arizona can sort of work together to be able to implement?
Well, and I think in this election, everyone very clearly got a message. I hope that they all heard it, but we very clearly received a message that Arizona wants us to work together to solve problems. For the first time since the 1990s, we have a Democratic Secretary of State, and we made significant gains in our statewide offices, Secretary of State, Corporation Commission, our Superintendent of Public Instruction, those kind of areas. We made significant gains as a Democratic Party. But the issues that are important to Arizona are bipartisan issues. Arizona wants us to fix our broken education system. Arizona wants us to get water taken care of. We've dinked around with our water policy, and we now need to come together with the other basin states on our Colorado River Compact and our drought contingency plan. These are huge issues that are going to impact the survival of Arizonans, and we need to get on it.
So there's been a lot in the news lately about how people who are Moms Demand Action volunteers, gun violence survivors, have sort of made this shift to moving into running for office themselves and had great success this year. What are some of the gun legislation that you would like to see passed within Arizona to sort of help address some of this problem of gun violence in this country?
Sure. So gun violence is not one thing. It's several different issues that come together. But when you actually look at gun violence, what we are looking at nationally are 321 people shot every day in the United States. About 90 of them die, and the majority of those are suicides. So certainly we need to look at delivery of mental health services and making sure that people have appropriate insurance and support so that they can receive those services. We need to get serious about something called, depending on how you've heard them addressed, stop laws or red flag laws, or what they're actually called is extreme risk orders of protection, so that family members and community professionals can note that an individual might be at risk for a finite period of time and can say, this is not a good time for you to possess your firearms, so we're going to hold them for you until your life is more stable. And that may be someone who has suddenly lost their sobriety for whatever reason, someone who is struggling through divorce or other exceptional life-changing events that may be making them depressed. And right now, there's not a mechanism in many states to allow you as a family member or close friend to have that impact, and we need to allow it. So that would be one area. So mental health. The other area is certainly school safety. Again, a lot of that is about school resource officers rather than hardening schools. I think that what's recently happened with the medical profession, this is our lane, is important. We have a federal law. I don't think many people realize this, but the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health are prohibited from gathering public health data on guns. So they cannot tell you with certainty some of the things that we can tell you. If you have a car accident, they can tell you how the quality of the light, whether it was daytime or nighttime, if it was raining or snowing, the make, model of the car, the road surface, and they can look at trends. And then with that, that's how we've made our automobiles safer over time and our roads safer over time. And we need to be able to do that with guns. So federally, we need to allow for the collection of data. This is a public health crisis, and or at least you may quibble about the term crisis, but this is a public health issue. And we need to treat it as such by gathering data and then analyzing it dispassionately. And then I would go on to talk about And some of these deserve to be a conversation. Should we have waiting periods after you purchase a firearm? Should you be able to buy it and take it with you? Background checks. Here in Arizona, you can buy a gun from anyone, anywhere, without any kind of background check. We need to work on that. And we need to definitely look at how folks who have been convicted of domestic violence, their access to firearms.
Did you face any backlash while you were on the campaign trail about being someone who was outspoken about the need for gun violence prevention?
So LD 24 is a very progressive district. So here, my constituents, I really do represent the face of my constituency here. So I didn't face backlash in that way, but I certainly do. There are individuals who are certain that my whole role is to take away their guns. That, I over my period of time as an advocate for gun violence prevention, I've certainly faced a lot of backlash from extremists.
Is there any advice that you would give to people who are thinking about running for office, especially women who are thinking about running for office in the future?
Do it. Absolutely do it. Women especially, where, we wait for someone to come and draft us, and kind of drag us into the public sphere. What I would say to someone who is thinking of running, and I just had this conversation with someone today, first off, think carefully about what it means. You're going to be in the public sphere. Are you ready for that? Is your family ready for that? And it's not as daunting as it sounds, but you do want to make sure that you're ready. Be clear in your message. What's important to you? Why are you running? Why are you the right person for this job? And then create your system and do it. I am here today because I had a good campaign staff. I had a great cadre of volunteers who knocked doors and made phone calls and staffed events. And we were true to our messaging. And those are the reasons I believe that I was successful in my run, because I had a very, very competitive race.
Is there anything else that you would like to talk about?
Again, we need to be involved in this process. And one of the things that struck me with the number of people when I met them, constituents here in the districts, that were surprised, oh my gosh, I'm meeting you. It shouldn't be an honor or surprise to meet your elected official. It's my honor to meet you. And so I think that we do make a difference as citizens, as constituents, as advocates, and we need to exercise that. So do make sure that you get your voice heard, write, call, show up at those coffees, visit them in their offices, tell them what's on your mind, because we really do listen and we need to hear from you. And I'm just looking forward to serving and hoping that I'm going to do a good job, hoping that I can reflect the values of my community in a way that makes them proud.
Well, thank you so much for running for office, and thank you for joining me today. This has been really great to hear about your campaign and your priorities.
Kelly, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for allowing me to join you today on Two Broads Talking Politics.
Do you enjoy sitting down with a hot cup of coffee for thoughtful discussions about politics and social topics from a feminist perspective?
Would you indulge us the occasional foray into pop culture or a tangent on the finer points of policy, history, or psychology?
Then join us on the Feminist Coffee Hour podcast for interviews with cool women
and an occasional man
who tell us about their fascinating activism, research, or creative projects.
From academic critiques of neoliberalism to fictional characters' rankings as feminist romantic partners to forever discussing bad takes on sex bots. Hear about it on Feminist Coffee Hour.
FeministCoffeeHour.com.
I am here in this segment with Nicole Clowney, who is the newly elected representative in the Arkansas State District 86. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, and congratulations on winning in your district.
Thank you so much.
So could we start? Could you just give a little bit of background on who you are and why you decided to run for state representative?
Absolutely. So I grew up not far from here. I grew up in Oklahoma and went to law school and practiced law for a little while. And as I practiced law, I worked for a nonprofit firm that did a lot of work with children's law issues. And so, we were taking on cases one at a time that dealt with big problems that a kid was having in the education system or the child welfare system or the juvenile justice system. And through that work, I saw that the changes that needed to be made were so much bigger than these one case at a time things. And while that work is critical, and I am so grateful for the people that dedicate their lives to that, I really kind of wanted to be able to start to approach it from a policy perspective. So it took me a while because I think, wasn't sure that I had the kind of background. I didn't have kind of the cookie cutter politician background, and I was very nervous about it. And that changed when I started our local group of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense up in Northwest Arkansas. I think joining that group and starting to spend a lot of time in the state capitol, sort of in the halls of power among the people that were making the decisions, I really saw that that kind of work was not as out of reach for somebody like me as I thought it previously was, and that it was really necessary that we get different types of voices. In my mind, we needed to have, for instance, a lot more women around those tables in those halls as part of those big conversations. And so that's really what pushed me over the edge to decide to run.
And so then this district is in Northwest Arkansas? It
is, yeah. It's Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is where the University of Arkansas is housed. So we are something of kind of a blue dot in a very red state.
Yeah, so I was looking at the numbers, and Democrats are definitely a super minority in the Arkansas State House and will continue to be in this next session. So what are some of the ways that you hope to work in the minority to advance some of the kinds of bills that you would like to see?
I think it's going to be a real session of finding common ground where we can. And the nice thing is that there are, we went from having 3 Democratic women to the House in the House to having 8 Democratic women in the House. So while our overall numbers stay the same, as you say, we're still in a super minority. We have almost 3 times as many women serving as House Democrats, which is really exciting. And I mention that because I think the kind of work that's going to need to be done in order to accomplish much this session will be the kind of coalition building and incremental progress and just kind of pragmatic thinking that I do think women do so often in so many parts of our lives in a way that I think will really bear fruit this legislative session. I hope that's the kind of work we'll be able to do.
And you are also a mom of young daughters. What are some of the kinds of things that you as a mom see as really important for the State House to be doing?
So I had a lot of trepidation about running as you mentioned, I have 2 little girls. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and they were even younger when I made the decision to run. And at the time I thought of all of the reasons why they needed me here. But the more I sort of sat up at night and thought about what I wanted for them and for their futures, the more I realized that this is something that I wanted to do, not sort of in spite of the fact that I had 2 kids at home, but because of it, because that's exactly the kind of thing that motivated me to want to do this work. So, what that means sort of concretely to me are a few things. Public education is one of my very top priorities. It's something that's kind of continuously under attack in our state, so that's going to need some serious defending. We've also got to do a lot better job of keeping our community safe. And one of the reasons that I ran, and one of the things that got me really interested in politics, is gun safety and gun violence prevention. And Arkansas, this past legislative session, passed a very extreme gun bill. It started as a guns on campus bill, but it morphed into something that was much more comprehensive and overreaching. And so now in Arkansas, guns are not only allowed on college campuses, but they are also allowed in a number of places where they previously weren't, like churches and all public places, so public parks, municipal buildings, all of that. And I think probably most stupidly, bars. So growing up in a college town and having my own children, thinking about the safety of our communities is something that I think is just paramount for any legislator. And for me, that means gun violence prevention as well.
So you've been part of Moms Demand Action, and of course you're not the only Moms Demand Action volunteer who ran for office this time. There were quite a number of you and a lot of people with a lot of success. What does that mean as an individual in a state legislature, knowing that you've got a much larger body of people and network with whom you're connected?
It's a great feeling to know that the work that we were doing last legislative session will still be going on this legislative session, and I will have that group of people doing that amazing work, doing that research, doing that organizing to back up whatever it is that I hope to achieve as a legislator. In the South, it is, I think, probably even more true than it is in other parts of the country, although maybe not. That's just my gut. That's not based on any actual data. But my instinct is that the legislators here, the legislators in Arkansas, especially when there's someone like me who is a Democrat in a super minority, which means for all intents and purposes, I have zero sort of procedural, the Democrats have zero procedural leverage to use. So the voice of one lone Democratic legislator is not super compelling. The voice of 2 or 3 or 4 sort of angry people who show up at the Capitol building to testify against a bill, a little bit compelling, but not that compelling. What is very compelling to the types of legislators that we hope to sort of, convince to vote for gun safety is loud voices of groups of constituents, right? The sort of grassroots mass movement in one direction. That's what legislators hear. Those voices are so much more powerful than any one legislator. So for me, knowing that anything I want to propose, will have, in terms of gun safety, will have the benefit of that kind of support is just invaluable, because that means so much more than my one voice in the legislature.
I know that you live in a fairly Democratic district, but did you face any pushback from people, and maybe that's more on social media, being someone who is outspokenly in favor of gun violence prevention and legislation around guns?
I think that has been the single most surprising thing to me with my work in gun violence prevention is the answer is sort of overwhelmingly no. And I know that that's not everybody's experience, but I was very, very concerned to join the movement early on for that reason. I thought, I have a family. I don't want to be a person with a target on my back because, people are going to accuse me of wanting to take all of their guns. What I have found is that through the course of campaigning and talking to people about what exactly the gun violence prevention movement stands for and what exactly Moms Demand Action is trying to accomplish, that once people have those conversations with you, there is so much more room where we agree than where we disagree. And you've all seen these numbers about, the overwhelming majority of Americans, gun owners or non-gun owners, agree on things like universal background checks or, trying to keep guns out of the hands of people with histories of domestic violence, these kinds of things. And so as soon as you kind of take the time to have those conversations with people, I've had very, very little pushback. Occasionally on social media, there's a thing here or there, but really substantively, I have found that the majority of Arkansans seem to be on board. And in fact, a lot of polling data is showing that is the truth, that attitudes are changing about gun safety, even in Arkansas, at a really amazing rate.
So one of the things I like to ask about, because it differs so much around the country, is what the Arkansas legislature kind of looks like in terms of how much time you're expected to be at the Capitol. Is this year-round, part-year, full-time, part-time? What does that look like in Arkansas?
Yeah, so it's a very interesting schedule in Arkansas. We meet for regular session for somewhere on the order of 90 days, give or take, once every 2 years. So I'm elected to a 2-year term, and I get one 90-day session, and that's it. And it's a 90-day session that begins in January of 2019. So there's very little prep time before we start. So it is a steep learning curve. It is a fast and furious couple of months, and then that's it for regular session. Now, there are other things, and I would imagine I would be away from home 2-3 times a month outside of that. outside of that regular session. But, I teach at the University of Arkansas. I will take off. I'll be on leave in the spring. But in Arkansas, being a legislator is a job where you can have another job. It's intended to be a part-time job and that you can have other employment. So I will teach at the university the 3 semesters when we are not in session.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It differs so much from place to place. I'm in Illinois where it's much more of kind of a full-time job.
Well, and it sort of limits, not sort of, it does. It really limits the types of folks who are able to run, which is one of the things that, I really thought about a lot when I was running, was just how fortunate I was to be in the position where I had a job that would say, okay, you can have, this 6-month break and your job will be waiting for you when you come back at the end of it. That is, incredibly rare. So we end up with a legislature that looks a lot different than it would if perhaps the playing field were a little bit more level and it was a full-time job that would support families year-round, no matter what the rest of their employment looked like.
Do you have any advice for people who are considering running for office?
I think my number one bit of advice, and I hope it doesn't sound too trite, but I do really mean it, is that if you were thinking seriously about running for office, in my mind, that's just about all the qualification you need to really run for office. I think especially people who haven't traditionally held office, so whether that be people of color or LGBTQ people or women, whatever it is, low income folks, whatever it is, if it is a different type of person running for office, there will be 1 million voices running through your head telling you all of the reasons why you can't do it. And that's for a reason, right? That's because the world has told you, or at least the country has told you, you are not the type of person that does this thing. And so I would say, to the extent that you can, if it is something that you really want to do, you can do it and go for it. Now, it's not as easy as that, but, oftentimes there are financial barriers and those types of things. But I would say the earlier you start thinking about it, there are all kinds of fantastic programs across the country for candidate training and candidate support. And, there's just so many resources out there. It's so easy to connect with the internet these days that, I think if it's something you really want to do, then don't let the reason that you don't do it be sort of your own self-doubt. We need a lot more self-critical politicians, is what I'm saying.
Totally agree. Well, Nicole, thank you so much for stepping up and running for office and letting yourself get past your self-doubts. And thank you for speaking with me today.
Oh, thank you very much for having these conversations. It's so important.
Thanks for listening to Two Broads Talking Politics. Our theme song is called Are You Listening? Off of the album Elephant Shaped Trees by the band Immunuri, and we're using it with permission of the band. Our logo and other original artwork is by Matthew Weflin and was created for use by this podcast.